Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing some of the most pressing issues facing our world today. I'm Berndt, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. Later on, I'll be joined by my esteemed co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcom, the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power Light. He had an unavoidable conflict for the start of our program today, but I've been looking forward to today's program because it dovetails with our Climate Hope Cards campaign, which is now collecting thousands of petition postcards addressed to the Biden administration and the EPA. We're going to deliver those postcards in DC this September, and it was actually a report co-authored by one of our panelists today, which inspired the focus for that campaign. The report lifted up how crucially important it is to update and strengthen current EPA protections. It is a true opportunity before us. And I received an email this morning from someone who wanted to collect postcards and wondered if they could collect even if they were not a member of a UCC church. The answer is yes. Anyone can help us collect postcards. The more, the better. I will share a link for more information for how to register and be a part of that effort. Now, let me introduce in the order in which they'll be speaking our speakers and panelists for today. Up first, we have Charles Harper, who is the author of that report I referenced, the co-author of that report. He is a climate change advocate originally from Dallas, Texas. He currently works as the senior policy lead for the power sector at Evergreen Action, an environmental nonprofit. Up next, we'll have Michael Hansen, who currently serves as the executive director of G.A.S.P, an air quality advocacy organization headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. He is passionate about social justice causes, including the climate crisis, environmental racism, food sovereignty, health equity, and queer liberation. And then finally today, we will hear from Madison Mayhew, who is the federal policy advocate with Interfaith Power Light, where she supports local IPL affiliates in shaping federal policy through a moral and just voice. She lives in Washington, D.C. and loves to spend her free time reading or bird watching with her partner. That sounds like a terrific time to me as well. Charles, if you could get us started, that would be terrific.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brooks, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm going to share my slides really quickly. But today I'll be talking about a lot of these very crucial rules that are at EPA, one of the best opportunities that the federal government has to address climate change and air pollution challenges. So as Brooks mentioned, I'm with Evergreen Action. We are an environmental nonprofit founded in 2019, working to lead an all-out mobilization to defeat the climate crisis. And our goal for today is to provide you with the info and the tools you need to help strengthen these critical EPA pollution rules. So EPA is working on 10 regulations right now that would tackle the air pollution and climate pollution that's coming from fossil fuel power plants, one of the leading contributors to climate change. So here's some great artwork that we commissioned on each of these 10 rules. So they would do things like reduce carbon pollution from coal and gas power plants, and strengthen air quality standards for a lot of these health-harming pollutants like smog and ozone, and also reduce some water pollution from toxic coal power plants and from coal ash storage sites, among other things. So today we'll be focusing mostly on the first two rules, which are explicitly designed to address climate change and climate pollution. But of these 10 rules, EPA has made a lot of progress on some of them. So this is a report card that Evergreen Action put out very recently, grading EPA's progress. And on eight of the rules, they've either completed the rule or are making some good progress on them. And there are two rules that are somewhat delayed. But even within the rules they're making progress on, there are some key areas where the agency and the administration should be strengthening the rules to really get at this toxic air pollution that's harming folks' health, exacerbating environmental injustice, and contributing to climate change. So we'll get into that today. So why are these rules so important? First of all, air pollution is a moral crisis. As y'all might know, air pollution kills 7 million people globally every year. And in the US, that is estimated to be 100 to 200,000 deaths a year that are exacerbated or contributed to by air pollution. Things like heart attacks, lung diseases that are caused by breathing in air pollution. And fossil fuel combustion is driving all of that air pollution and is also the leading driver of the climate crisis and environmental injustice, as folks here likely know. So that's why it's so important that we tackle air pollution. And on the climate front, we need to do a lot more as well. So under the Paris Agreement, the US has promised to cut its carbon pollution that causes climate change in half this decade. That's that orange line. But the current policies we have on the books are set to only get us to the blue line, leaving about a 10% gap in carbon dioxide emissions that we need to cut through additional policies. So these important EPA rules are one of the best opportunities we have to close that gap. So today we're focused on power plant emissions, which you can see on the climate pollution front contribute 1/4 of economy-wide pollution. So that's that orange segment of the graph. But as y'all might know, as we increasingly adopt electric vehicles and electric heat pumps for homes, a lot of that other section of the graph will start running on electricity. So with clean electricity running our power grid, we can actually cut 75% of total carbon emissions in the country. Once those sectors are electrified and running on clean energy, we can cut our emissions 75% just through that alone, which is why it's so important that we reduce emissions from power plants and clean up electricity. So why these rules in particular? So these regulations would reduce more climate pollution than any other available policy. So you might know that Congress last year passed a bill addressing climate change, which is a great start. And now that we've passed that bill, it's important that we do additional actions to close that gap. And these regulations from EPA are the best available policy we have, and actually could get us to 77% clean electricity this decade by 2030. Right now, we're at 40% clean energy, and these rules could get us to 77% clean energy this decade, which is a huge deal for the climate and air pollution. So on this front, on the carbon rules that I talked about that reduce climate pollution, EPA did just put out a proposal just last month on these rules. And if strengthened, they could reduce more greenhouse gas pollutions than any of the other rules or any other policy. So what would these carbon pollution rules do in particular? They would directly regulate the amount of carbon dioxide that power plants are allowed to emit. So right now, power plants, unfortunately, can pollute unlimited amounts of carbon pollution into the atmosphere. There are no regulations on how much pollution they can emit. But with these rules, EPA would require utilities and power plants to switch to cleaner forms of energy and directly reduce the carbon pollution that they're spewing into the atmosphere. These rules are a big deal for climate. So the rules as EPA just proposed them would require many power plants to cut 90% of their carbon pollution by 2030 or 2035. This is a big deal for the climate. So there are a few areas where EPA probably does need to strengthen the rules too, and that's where all of the comments that folks here hoping to gather would come in. So on the climate rules in particular, there are two areas where the rules probably should be strengthened. So right now the rules would cover all coal plants, but would only cover about 10% of existing natural gas or fossil gas power plants. Right now, those produce about half of all the climate pollution. So the fact that most of those plants are not covered by the proposed rules is an issue. And to really address climate change and all of the air pollution that comes from those gas power plants, we really need to expand that number. The second area where the rules should probably be strengthened is when it comes to the deadlines for compliance. So we mentioned that we need to cut climate pollution in half this decade to achieve these science-based targets of 1.5 degrees of warming and the Paris Agreement's goals, all of these essential targets we have. And if the rules don't kick in until 2035, which is the case here, then that's not going to help us meet our 2030 climate target that's so essential to reduce and stop the worst impacts of climate change. So we need to move these compliance deadlines ahead, likely to 2030, to make sure that we're making progress in the near term to avert the worst possible climate futures that we do not want to see. So with that, I will turn it over to my next panelist, and happy to answer any other questions as well. I know I went through these rules somewhat fast, but there's a lot to talk to you about today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was a great way to get us started. And Michael, we'll turn things over to you now.
All right. Thanks, Brooks. I'm going to talk to you all about local impacts in Alabama, where I'm from. So first, I want to introduce myself and give you a little context. My name is Michael Hansen. I started working at G.A.S.P about 10 years ago on Earth Day, 2013, and was promoted to executive director in 2015. And my background is actually in marketing and public relations and advertising. Before working at G.A.S.P, I worked at botanical gardens. I worked in public health campaigns. So I enjoy working in the environmental and health intersecting spaces. I love cooking, gardening. I love wine, animals, the outdoors. I'm currently in Germany for the United Nations conference, climate change conference. So if you see me sipping this Riesling, it's because I'm acting like a local. And I just got back from the negotiation, and it was fascinating to watch. But a little bit about G.A.S.P. Our mission is to enhance the health and well-being of Alabamians by reducing air pollution, advancing environmental justice, and promoting climate solutions through education, advocacy, and collaboration. Our vision is a healthy, just, and thriving Alabama for everyone. And we're doing this work mostly in the Birmingham metropolitan area. G.A.S.P stands for the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution. So Birmingham was founded as a post-Civil War Reconstruction era industrial city because of the presence of coal, iron ore, and limestone here in the lower Appalachian Mountains. And those are the ingredients for steelmaking. And so because of the way Birmingham boomed overnight and grew up into this urban center, we got the name the Magic City, but we also got all the air pollution that comes with it. And we also have another nickname, the Pittsburgh of the South, for the same reason. Pittsburgh has historically had terrible air pollution problems. So I just want to show you some photos over the years of what Birmingham has looked like from going back to the turn of the century, the 19th century to today. You get an idea of the severity of the air pollution problems we've been living with. And this photo was just a couple years ago. And there's a playground right in the forefront of this photo, gives you an idea of the proximity. And another piece of context is that all of this is happening in a formerly segregated city, Jim Crow segregation. So a lot of communities were restricted to Black only and surrounded by heavy industry. And that legacy carries forward today. So the people who are suffering the most are those communities still today. So the major sources of pollution that we're still facing are the coking industry, steel making, and coal-fired power plants. Those are three of the main sources of pollution in Birmingham, another being transportation. So let's talk a little bit about air pollution and climate change in the local context. We still have elected officials in Alabama claiming climate change is not real or that humans don't contribute to it. We have in the forefront of this picture the James H. Miller power plant owned by Alabama Power, a Southern company. It is the #1 greenhouse gas emitter in the United States. And the company is adding 2 gigawatts of fossil gas to the generating capacity at this very moment when we need to be decarbonizing. And the state of Alabama overall is responsible for a little over 95 million metric tons of energy-related carbon dioxide, which is about the equivalent of the country of Venezuela. So Birmingham, some fast facts, I'm just going to throw these up on the screen, but the thing I want you to notice here is that the city of Birmingham is about 73% Black. It's 27% below poverty overall. 42% of children are living in poverty. The median household income is only $32,000, and the per capita income is around 20. And the metro area, if you zoom out a little bit, it's about 1.1 million. And it's still over 30% Black. And we got about 30,000 kids with asthma, 106,000 adults, 100,000 people with COPD. and nearly 500,000 people of color, and almost 200,000 people living in poverty. So let's talk about the air. The American Lung Association's annual State of the Air report gave us an F for ozone pollution. Ozone is formed with nitrogen oxide from industry, involves organic compounds from industry and transportation. All of these pollutants combine and create ground level ozone that's like sunburn on your lungs. ALA also ranked Birmingham 18th worst for particulate matter soot pollution on an annual basis. And why it matters, Charles sort of talked about this already, but air pollution is, in fact, the single greatest environmental risk factor for premature death and disease in the world, killing millions of people every year. Diving in a little bit on the Miller Steam Plant, this plant has a generating capacity of 2,800 megawatts, and their annual CO2 emissions are a little over 23 million metric tons. And that is about the equivalent of the country of Chile, and as well as other pollutants that I put up here on the screen. And if you zoom out to a 10-mile radius from this plant, it's at the 95th to 100th percentile for cancer risk and respiratory hazard. Sorry, not Chile, Panama and Honduras combined. So there you go. Alabama Power is responsible for 85 million tons of electricity, which is more than Chile. That's where I was going with that. And Alabama Power is, like I said, owned by Southern Company. They are dead last in energy efficiency programs. They charge customers $5.41 per kilowatt per month to generate their own electricity, something we call the sun tax. So this discourages the adoption of clean, renewable energy in the state of Alabama while they're adding 2 gigawatts of new fossil gas to the grid, and while they have the #1 greenhouse gas polluter in the country. They have terrible policies when it comes to net metering and things of that nature. We don't have net metering, but the equivalent is terrible. And all of this is enabled by elected officials who deny the climate crisis. Right here, you've got the Alabama Public Service Commission, or as I like to call them, the Alabama Power Service Commission, because they put the power company first. So just to wrap things up and tie it all together, the climate crisis is here. We all know that. It's already affected millions of people across the world. And it's not evenly distributed. Neither is the air pollution crisis. Black people, indigenous people, people of color, poor people, these are the communities that are suffering the first and most from the climate crisis and air pollution. We work on air pollution because, as Charles said, is a moral issue. Air pollution causes climate change. And as we've seen with the Canada situation, the wildfire smoke, climate change contributes to air pollution. So these are reinforcing systems. And they are justice issues. That's my presentation. I'll be happy to take questions. I know I threw a lot of information out there on these slides. On to our next presenter.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. That was a terrific presentation. Madison, we turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me get my PowerPoint up and running. It's so great to be with you all today, and it's such a pleasure to join the UCC. Fun fact, my first job after grad school is actually with the UCC's Washington, D.C. office, so it's really great to be back here with all of you. As Brooks mentioned, I'm the federal policy advocate with Interfaith Power Light and have the pleasure of supporting our state affiliates in their federal advocacy work. As we heard previously, just want to remember and reemphasize that we have made a lot of significant climate progress with the Inflation Reduction Act by making clean energy more accessible, providing tons of new clean energy jobs, and ultimately reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. But on its own, the IRA will not help us reach our climate goals. And as Michael so clearly stated, the climate crisis is upon us and impacting so many of our beloved communities. And we need the U.S. to do more to protect our communities and the sacred earth. Oops. As you can see here, and as Charles pointed out, there are lots of opportunity ahead of us and for the administration to drive down emissions and deliver really important public health benefits. We need President Biden to do all that he can, use every tool in the toolbox to advance environmental justice and reduce climate pollution and overall increase his climate ambition. And this is just a small section of the upcoming rules, but as Charles mentioned, they are incredibly important. So how can people of faith take action, and how can people of faith help? For every rule that is proposed, there is a window of opportunity to submit public comments and attend hearings to provide input on the rule, whether to make it stronger or offer support. And this is a really great opportunity to share why we as people of faith care about these rules and their implications for communities we care about, and to promote environmental justice. As you can see here, this is a picture of one of our environmental leaders in Virginia, G.A.S.P from Virginia IPL, testifying at a recent virtual hearing. And I think it's really important for us to emphasize that people of faith have a really unique voice and role to play in climate advocacy. Our shared values call us to be good stewards of our sacred earth and ensure everyone is cared for. And by participating in public comments or hearings, we are living our values to ensure all of our neighbors in our common home are protected from harm caused by toxic pollution. Another great way to take action is by writing a letter to the editor. We know that LTEs and op-eds are sometimes the most popular sections of a newspaper. They're a great way to identify a key issue or even highlight elected officials in the process. And when you're thinking about either crafting an LTE or writing public comments or attending a virtual hearing, you can really lean into your faith tradition. What values are you called by to speak into these issues and highlight these issues at hand? Another opportunity is to sign on to faith leader letters. You'll see a lot of them being passed around over the next couple of weeks. I have a few from IPL that I would be grateful for sign-ons that I'll share in just a moment. And they're a great way to sign on in solidarity with other clergy and other faith leaders to make that public statement in support of stronger rules. And then lastly, you can also contact your members of Congress. They enjoy hearing from you about your support or concern about particular rules, and they themselves can have influence. They can write letters of support about a particular rule. They can weigh in with the administration. And I think it's also really important here to highlight a piece of legislation that makes these rules incredibly timely. There is a piece of legislation called the Congressional Review Act that can be introduced and can be used as an oversight tool for Congress to overturn final rules proposed by federal agencies. And we obviously don't want this to happen, although we have seen it proposed recently in regards to the heavy duty truck rule. It was ultimately defeated, but we want to make sure that our members and our senators know to hold the line if a Congressional Review Act is introduced, to make sure that these administrative rules are as strong as possible and are successful in getting across the finish line. And now I'm just going to talk through a few opportunities to get engaged. You've heard about some rules, and I'm just going to walk through a few more details. The first is the mercury and air toxic standard, which regulates mercury pollution, but also arsenic and other heavy metals that cause disease and premature death. We know that mercury from coal-fired power plants when it's released into the air, it falls into our waterways and accumulates in fish that many families eat. And this potent neurotoxin causes permanent damage to the brains of babies and fetuses, leading to developmental delays, learning disabilities, and even birth defects. And previous updates the EPA has made to this rule have resulted in reductions to mercury pollution, but we know more is needed. And right now, the comment period is open until June 23rd. And so it's a great opportunity to submit comments and share your voice. And I'll share a link to make that easy to do that in just a moment. And then next, we have the carbon pollution rule, which we've heard some about already. This is going to be such a huge priority for IPL and also many of our partners, knowing that it has the opportunity to significantly reduce emissions across the board. And I think it's worth noting here that for the past decade, people of faith and conscience have advocated for strong EPA safeguards against climate pollution from power plants. And so when this proposal was made back in May, it was really exciting and shows a great window of opportunity to really strengthen and reduce carbon pollution. We know that fossil fuel companies are going to fight really hard against this rule. And so we need all of our faithful climate advocates and community leaders to really stand strong and show public support for this rule, going back to writing LTEs, even showing on social media, letting your members of Congress know. And IPL is circulating a faith leader letter, and we're taking signatures through July 12th. I'd be very grateful for your signature there. And then there's an opportunity to submit public comments through August 8th. And then lastly, just going to highlight some clean cars and trucks rules. I know this is beyond the power sector rule and goes into the transportation sector, but felt important to highlight, particularly because the heavy duty vehicle standards comment period closes tomorrow. So it's a really last minute advocacy chance to get in more comments. But just want to highlight that transportation is the #1 source of climate pollution in the US. It contributes to 27% of greenhouse gas emissions. And over the past 5 decades, adopting clean car standards has been one of the most significant actions the US has taken to reduce its reliance on oil. So really great opportunity here. IPL has a faith leader letter for both heavy duty vehicles and also for light duty vehicles, which mostly focuses on smaller cars and SUVs and etc. So really great opportunity to engage here. And I'll put all of this information in the chat in just a moment as well. And then wrapping up here, slides are frozen. There we go. Just really want to thank you for speaking out and for learning about these administrative rules. As you've heard and as you'll continue to hear, there will be lots of opportunities to be engaged over the next several weeks and months. And here's a link for you to sign up to stay engaged with updates from IPL. We aren't following all of the rules, but we are following a significant portion of them. And so we will have faith leader letters, but also opportunities to submit comments. And we're also partnering with the Climate Action Campaign to recruit folks to join what they're calling the Mountain of Support for timely responses when rules are released, whether that be to release public comments or sign-on letters, and CAC makes it incredibly easy to do so. And I'll put a link in the chat to join that list as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I know, like others have said, we've gone through a lot, so happy to stick around to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Madison. That was a terrific presentation. We do have time now for questions from the audience. Opening question, I'll direct maybe to Charles first. Charles, there's been some stories in the newspaper about the EPA and relationship to the Supreme Court. What are the concerns there, the dangers? What's happened already? What's still to come? What can you tell us there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So last summer, the Supreme Court did decide a case about EPA regulations. You might have heard of it. It's called West Virginia v. EPA. And that was a bit of a setback for EPA's last attempt to regulate climate pollution under the Obama administration. So it did limit exactly how EPA can go about regulating pollution. So EPA followed that decision very closely and designed its new proposal out this year based on the guidelines and constraints set by the Supreme Court. So I don't want to get into necessarily all the nitty-gritty details, but they used a different approach to regulate pollution this time around because the Supreme Court tied their hands a little bit. And I think that opponents of climate action will probably be suing again based on these EPA rules. As Madison mentioned, they would do a lot to reduce fossil fuel use and climate pollution, which would hurt some folks' business model, unfortunately. So there's likely to be another lawsuit, but these rules are within all the guidelines set by the Supreme Court last year. Who knows what will happen with the court? Never want to make any bets on it per se, but the administration did all it can to make sure that these rules are within the guidelines set by the law and the court.
Thanks. That's an important point, because I think some people, when they see the headlines, they think it's cutting out the legs of the things that are currently being considered. So it's important to know that. Michael, I have a question for you. You know, as we hear about the many different things you are facing in Alabama with the sun tax and the state legislature and everything there, it seems like it's a wall with many bricks. And I'm wondering, for you, where do you see that there's some real opportunities to do some chipping away at that wall and to make some progress? Kind of where are you kind of focused on or seeing something, some potential there?
Oh gosh, that's the $1 million question. And Rev Malcom, I see, is here, and he and I are collaborating and conspiring on that very question all the time. I think, first of all, I think the most important thing that folks can do is to educate themselves and then educate their neighbors. There's just a lot of information that people are not aware of. For example, the Public Service Commission, which I shared earlier, is such an obscure agency in most states. And in a place like Alabama, they haven't held a formal rate review in more than, I think it's nearly 40 years at this point, which is in most states, every couple of years, every 5 years or so. We haven't had one in 4 decades. So educating yourself about who has the power to affect change. It's the Public Service Commission. It's the Department of Environmental Management. Get to know the regulators. Find out where they go to church and, make their acquaintance, and do what you can at the city hall and your city council and mayor's office. I think those sorts of things, we educate yourself about the issues and pass it on. That will do a whole lot of good. And then once you do that, join groups like G.A.S.P, People's Justice Council, IPL, Evergreen, whoever's doing work in your community, join up with those people because together we're a lot more powerful.
Thanks. And since I know that this is an issue important to Reverend Michael Malcom, Michael, do you want to jump in on this as well? We're happy to have you join us.
love to jump in. However, I'll jump in and not know where I'm jumping to. So I need to listen at the conversation to find out where we are on that.
All right. We appreciate that. Madison, a question for you. You kind of get this, vantage point where you get to see the incredible communities of faith throughout the country that are working to address climate change. Can you tell us about, how you have seen congregations kind of, rise to the occasion? Are they doing movie nights? Are they participating in kind of faith action weeks? What is kind of galvanizing and getting congregations involved so that their members are getting activated?
That's a great question, and I think it definitely varies by state. I know we have our national program called Faithful Climate Action Week, where folks are doing movie screenings and learning about our most recent campaign focused on the transition to clean energy, which, I think is a great education tool and understanding the road ahead. But I think, I'm also work half of my time with our local IPL DMV affiliate, and really get to learn from folks on the ground about what they care about. And at the moment right now, we're doing a lot of education about indoor methane pollution. And we're leading that effort by doing indoor kitchen testings and showing people what types of pollution exist in their kitchen when they cook with a gas stove, and using that as an organizing tool to then move policy forward here in DC. And I see that being a great example of what's possible in organizing faith communities. It really starts with education. And like Michael was noting earlier, helping people connect those dots and understanding that, the science is very clear and is a really motivating factor in what our call to action to implement stronger policies, whether that be through the super obscure Public Service Commission or taking it all the way up to Congress. The intersections are very, incredibly strong. And so how can we make sure that people understand those implications?
Great, thanks. We have a question in our audience that references a UCC report that came out just before the pandemic began. I was on the 100 leading industrial toxic emission polluters in the United States. And in that case, it focused a lot on toxic air emissions that involved heavy metals. And so the question there is whether or not any of the EPA rules that are going to be up for consideration touch upon those particular forms of pollution. Any responses there? A hard one there. Go ahead, Charles.
Let's see. This was which form of pollution again?
It's a lot of it involved heavy metals being kind of put into the air. It was looking at industrial sources of pollution from plants. And so often out of the top 100, they weren't necessarily often coal plants, but were involved in other industries, maybe connected to fossil fuels, but they're heavily concentrated in Houston and Cancer Alley.
Yeah, so the mercury and air toxic standard that Madison mentioned is about heavy metal pollution into the air, but I think that one is exclusively about power plants. There are some other EPA rules that cover heavy metal pollution into waterways, including regulations on coal ash, which a lot of times can leach heavy metals into folks' groundwater that they might drop in wells for drinking, et cetera. So I think there's some ongoing action to get some more EPA regulations around heavy industry as well. But that's not one of the ones that I'm tracking right now, but it's definitely something we can start to push the agency to do more on, because heavy metals are really bad for your health, as everyone can probably guess.
Yeah. And at the time of the report, we did note that, the pollution coming from these facilities was legal. Often it wasn't going over limits or anything like that. And so there is some definite need to rein that in. All right. Other questions here from the audience?
I guess I can see if I can jump in. It may be off topic. I don't know. I'm coming in the middle of this thing, so I really don't know what I'm doing here. But I'm gonna ask this question anyway. Given and I know Michael Hansen and Maddie, you all know more than I can know about Charles or Berndt in this, knowing hands-on. But given that we have issue with our governmental agencies often siding with our state agencies, who often side with the industries that are polluting our communities, how trustworthy or how much faith should we even put in EPA regulation in the first place?
I can go first. I don't know if we should put faith in these folks per se, and that's why a lot of public pressure is good to make sure they're doing the right thing. But I do think that EPA regulations are our best opportunity. A lot of states that don't care about climate change or public health aren't going to be doing anything about these issues. And those are a lot of times the states that have the worst environmental injustice and pollution in those communities. So the only way to really get at the pollution there is through federal policy, through EPA. So some states might be going above and beyond, some communities might be going above and beyond, but in the places where pollution is the worst, EPA is really the only regulator, the only person who can intervene and help out with pollution there.
I don't even know what to add. Part of me wants to just say, well, we don't have a whole lot of levers, to be frank. When you're in a place like Alabama or Louisiana or Texas or any of these places with the oil and gas industry dominating legislatures and agencies, I guess we have to rely to an extent on EPA and federal agencies, and then we can act up when they don't listen to us. There's that.
Well, I'll give you a case in point. So I've been working with communities throughout the Gulf South, but one in particular, Gloucester, Mississippi. I think those who have heard me speak for a while now, you've heard me both fuss and cuss about this place. But there's this biomass plant, Drax Biomass, that sits right literally in the backyard of this trailer home community. EPA just recently met with this community. There was over 200 audience members that showed up to voice concern and have a conversation with EPA. And while they're having this meeting, MDEQ, Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, is having a meeting with these community members. And that very same week, this Drax Biomass had been fined or caught a second time over polluting this particular community. And while they're having this meeting, MDEQ did not say anything to EPA nor these people about them being polluted once again. So when you're going and you're voicing these things, but you have the states who are operating, and I'm trying to be specific in saying the states, because our federal agencies are often limited by what the states do. And when you have these states that are playing unfair and aren't being protective of the people that they're supposed to be protective of, and they choose profit over people and planet, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to respond in that setting? And Brother Thad, maybe you could come in there, because that does deal directly with policy, but it deals with policy on interlocking, so to speak, relationship because you get caught up in the state, and we get caught up in the middle of that fight, and our communities are the ones that don't get help. What are we supposed to do?
That is such a great question, Reverend Malcom. And I hear the frustration and pain from that tension, and I just want to acknowledge that, and I'm sorry that that is the case. I think something that I'm immediately thinking of, which may not be a solution, but I'm often reminded of how low staffed the EPA is currently and how it needs to be significantly staffed up, and having more of a robust staffing up could really help in addressing some of these loopholes. Obviously, this is a power dynamic that we're talking about. Something else that comes to mind is talking to elected officials, contacting members of Congress. Obviously, in states where those elected officials can decide with industry, is industry also that creates complications. And this is giving me a lot of food for thought to think about how can we be be mindful of this and push for solutions that make sure that communities are adequately heard in these situations. But Charles, Michael, do you have anything to add here?
I mean, if the plants are violating federal laws, then you could also look into like working with partners on a lawsuit or something like that. But yeah, there are a lot of violators of environmental laws around the country, and only so much staff that's trying to track down those violations, unfortunately. Yeah, I agree with Madison on the point about having more funding for environmental regulators, especially federally. I think the current EPA administrator, Michael Regan, has really emphasized more environmental monitoring, air pollution, water pollution monitoring around the country, so that when folks are asleep on the job, especially in some states with cozy relationships to polluters, that we can catch them in the act. And that's really important, and more definitely needs to be done on that front.
Yeah, I agree with that, with what both of you said. And on the monitoring front, something that we at G.A.S.P have done on the local level is use community science as a tool for collecting information when the regulators are asleep at the wheel, whether intentionally or just due to lack of resources. So we'll go out and we'll monitor for particulate matter or air toxics or whatever we're concerned about. And we'll use that data to say, look, y'all should be doing more. And recently, for example, there was a landfill fire near us. And because we were doing air monitoring, the EPA ended up coming in because the state wasn't doing it. And so using all the tools in your toolbox, so writing these postcards, keeping people informed, educating yourself, doing community science with your partners, all of that, it adds up. And then, you know, when push comes to shove, you can always go to the legal system. And then if that doesn't work, you know, civil disobedience sometimes is in order. We're getting to that point because this is urgent.
I knew that Hansen would come in just because I know his work and know the work of G.A.S.P. So I knew that the citizen science would come up. I was hoping that it would because in all actuality, this is to speak to congregations as well as community who's listening. That is by far the best thing that we can do. The EPA can't do it all. That's what I was really trying to get to. And when, especially in the South, and in particular in our Gulf states, when we have our agencies that side more with our polluters than they do with the people's pain, it's up for us as citizens to step in. And congregations are by far one of the best places for your voluntary labor pool to look out for your community, as well as it's one of your best advocacy pools. I was hoping that Brother Thaddeus would have said that we all get in the street and start to chant, hell no, we won't go. And we all get out here and we get to fight and do some real good, strong work out here together on the policy side, but on the practical side, we can give voice to our communities by working together and doing citizen science studies. Whereas in G.A.S.P has been doing air monitoring, you've got some other communities that have been able to get relief for their community because they've done citizen health surveys where they've gone back and asked their communities what's ailing you, and they were able to pile in the symptoms of what could be ailing that community and bring scientists in to look at the various emissions that could be causing that, and it has helped out as well. So there's a lot that we can do to help out EPA and help out our communities to bring some light to the situations that we are facing. And I'm speaking specifically to communities and congregations right now on this, because we have the hands and the feet to make that happen. I didn't get to, excuse me just a second, Brooks, but I didn't get a chance to do the opening. But if I had a chance to do the opening, it would have been doing the illustration about the priest who had been standing in front of his congregation, and he put out in front of them this crucifix, and he turned off all the lights, and he put a candle behind the crucifix, and he said to him as it cast this big shadow that Jesus has no hands and feet now. He's excuse me, he's been crucified, but we are the hands and feet now, and it's for us to do the work, and we stand under the shadow of the cross. And so I'm just trying to say, as I'm getting choked to death, I'm just trying to say that it's up for us to get out and do the work, and we can do it because we have the means.
Thank you, Michael. I think you just gave a Sunday sermon to a number of people, clergy in the audience, frantically writing down some notes there on what you said. Appreciate that framing. And I'm noting as well in the comments that Madison, do you want to say anything about the citizen science that you're seeing in DC? Is that the same project that Jacoby Wilson is spearheading? I know some of our DC congregations have been involved in that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if it's the same, but I mentioned it a little earlier. We are, we're doing two things. First, several months ago, we did a bunch of testing around the city to identify gas leaks from our pipe infrastructure in the city. Our gas utility, Washington Gas, is proposing spending millions of local tax dollars to replace our gas pipes in the city, and we are trying to demonstrate how harmful this infrastructure is for our community by showing any type of gas leaks, whether it's underground or in our homes, and it's harmful for our health. And we actually identified several sites around the city that were at explosive levels. And so we're using that data as a call to action by the city to more quickly transition to more sustainable and clean energy. And we're doing something similar. We got a nitrogen dioxide tester that we're testing nitrous oxide in people's homes for folks who have gas stoves. We know that it's an incredibly harmful pollutant and impacts our lung health. Over 42% of kids who live in homes with gas stoves have an increased chance of developing asthma. And so, but there are no regulations for indoor pollution. And so we're trying to use this data to articulate to DC Council why we need incentives for DC residents, particularly low and moderate income households, to be able to afford the ability to transition to clean and green kitchen appliances. We've seen a lot of discussion in Congress recently about gas stoves, and it's been interesting to watch, but I work with amazing colleagues who often am reminded that even though we're receiving a lot of hate, I think it's a clear indication that we're winning. There's a lot of movement and education about the dangers of methane gas. And there's a lot of excitement and energy to really call attention to it. And so I think it's a really clear example of what citizen science can do. And we're seeing more examples pop up across the country. And so just really energized by that work.
Thank you, Madison. Michael, I'm seeing a future webinar topic for us there with citizen science. I like it. That's terrific. Before we kind of move to wrapping up, there's one thing maybe Charles or Madison, you can just kind of help illuminate for us, which is kind of help us to understand how this comment process works. What's going on at the EPA in terms of how they, take in these comments and weight them and the kind of, what happens after those comments are submitted that can help us understand what's going on there.
Madison, you want to go first?
You probably are more familiar with that process than I am, so I'll hand it off to you.
Okay. So yeah, as Madison mentioned, there are 3 rules right now that EPA is taking public comment on. So with all of those rules, they're required by law to accept comments from any member of the public to inform the rules before they're finalized. So it's a 2-step process where first EPA puts out a proposal and then asks citizens for their feedback on the proposal. And then about a year later, we'll finalize the rule based on all of those comments that come in. So with big EPA rules, a lot of times there will be over 1 million comments from citizens around the country. Overwhelmingly usually in favor of the environment and climate action, but companies, fossil fuel companies and other opponents are definitely going to be weighing in as well, as much as possible. Sometimes with AstroTurf, I don't think they're always above some dirty tricks. So making sure that there is overwhelming support for really strong rules that'll tackle pollution is essential so that EPA doesn't get cold feet when they're getting all this pressure from the industry on the other side as well. So really essential that the comment deadlines are in most cases June, July, and then the carbon standards, the climate rule is August 8th. So you have a little bit of time, but not too much. So it's really essential to get in there before the deadlines.
Right.
Go ahead, Michael. I see your hand raised.
Just really quickly, got to plug a UCC webinar coming up. It's one People's Justice Council, G.A.S.P, a lot of others are a part of. It's called the Your Voice Matters, and it's going to be about It's about rulemaking for 3 different rules: cars, trucks, and
buses,
else.
wasn't it?
Bus. I don't know.
I can't remember.
What's happened is I closed my browser tab, so I've got to get the link right. There it is. So I just wanted to drop that registration link in there for folks if they're interested. It's coming up this week.
All right, thanks. Final question here. So we've got, we can know how we as citizens can give some comments and make some difference in multiple ways. At the same time, I'm wondering about the opposition. We hear about the industries putting pressure on the EPA. Can one of you illuminate how exactly does that happen? When we talk about the industries putting pressure, are they have people stopping by in suits at the EPA? What does that mean? What's going on there for how industries are trying to tilt things in the other direction?
Charles, you can jump in if I miss anything, but one thing that comes to mind is the public hearings are open to anyone, and you can testify on behalf of an organization or an industry. And so folks from fossil fuel companies often jump into those and support or against particular rules, and can also submit public comments, just like faith communities can, or faith organizations. So we're just trying all we can to show our support, but as you mentioned, industry comes in also. But Charles, are there other avenues that I'm missing?
Yeah, there might be some meetings with EPA staff as well. Usually they're on Zoom these days, maybe not people in suits talking with the agency, but I guess climate advocates and nonprofits have been meeting with EPA about these rules, and I imagine that they're also taking meetings with industry folks as well.